The sound of a boot connecting with my ribs was something I never thought I would remember so clearly. It was not just the crack that echoed through my body, but the way the air left my lungs all at once. For a moment, I could not even scream. I folded over, gasping, my chest burning with white-hot pain. I was only 25 years old, but in that instant, I felt twice my age, fragile and breakable like a doll that had been thrown against a wall too many times. My stepfather, Harold Carter, stood over me, his face red and twisted with rage. His voice roared down at me, the words searing into my ears. "Respect me." That was all he said, but it landed heavier than his boot. I tasted blood in my mouth as I tried to drag air back into my lungs. I looked to the side, desperate for help, but my mother Donna sat stiff in her chair, her face frozen, hands clenched in her lap. She did not move. She did not even blink. My stepsister Madison leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, smirking like this was nothing more than a family argument gone too far. Neither of them reached for me. Neither of them shouted at Harold to stop. I realized in that moment that I was utterly alone in this house, even though it was full of people who were supposed to protect me. The pain sharpened as I tried to roll onto my side. Breathing felt like swallowing glass. My vision blurred around the edges. The sound of Harold pacing across the wooden floorboards was like thunder. He muttered to himself, repeating the same words, demanding respect, demanding obedience, as if breaking my ribs was the only way to get it. I wanted to cry, but my tears felt trapped inside, stuck somewhere between fear and rage. Through the haze, I became aware of another sound, a knock at the door. At first faint, then louder, more urgent. The voice of our neighbor Evelyn carried through the night air. "Clara, are you okay?" The banging grew harder. I wanted to call out to her to beg her not to leave, but all that came out of my mouth was a choked whimper. Harold froze for a second, his head snapping toward the door. Then he growled, "Stay quiet." His eyes locked onto mine, and the threat was clear. If I said a word, there would be worse waiting for me. Donna rose slowly, smoothing her skirt, and walked toward the door. She opened it only a crack, her body blocking Evelyn's view. "Everything is fine," she said in a too sweet voice. Clara tripped. "She is clumsy. Just a little accident." My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to scream that it was not an accident. I wanted to grab Evelyn's hand and never let go. But fear weighed heavier than broken ribs. Evelyn's voice sharpened. "I heard something." That did not sound like a fall. Donna chuckled a hollow sound. "You know how dramatic Clara can be." Harold stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed, his glare burning into me like fire. I swallowed my words and nodded weakly from the floor when Evelyn craned her neck to look past my mother. I mouthed the word accident, forcing the lie because I was terrified of what would happen the second the door shut again. Evelyn lingered for a moment, suspicion etched on her face. Then she said she was calling 911 just to be safe. My mother's smile faltered, but she did not stop her. Within minutes, the wail of sirens filled the night. Harold cursed under his breath, pacing like a caged animal. Madison disappeared into her room, slamming the door behind her, leaving me sprawled on the floor with pain radiating through every nerve. When the door burst open again, it was not Evelyn but two EMTs in Navy uniforms carrying medical bags, followed by two uniformed police officers. Their flashlights swept across the room, catching me curled up, gasping, my shirt stained with blood where it had seeped from my mouth. One EMT crouched beside me instantly, his voice calm and professional. "Try not to move. We are going to help you breathe." I flinched when his hands touched my side, the agony sharp enough to make me cry out. The officers asked questions quickly. What happened here? Did she fall? Did someone hit her? My mother's voice floated through the haze. She tripped over the rug. "She is clumsy." She fell against the table. I could feel Harold's gaze drilling into me from across the room. I knew if I said his name right there, if I whispered the truth, he would make me pay the moment these people left. Fear was a chain around my throat. So I nodded weakly, echoing my mother's lie. Accident. The EMTs exchanged looks but said nothing. They slid a board under me, carefully strapping me down, placing an oxygen mask over my face. Every bump on the way to the stretcher made the pain flare white hot. As they carried me past Evelyn, who stood on the porch, I saw her eyes wide with worry. She touched my hand lightly and whispered, "I saw more than they think. Hang on, Clara. You are not alone." For the first time that night, a flicker of hope sparked in my chest. It was tiny, fragile, but it was there. Even as the ambulance doors slammed shut, even as Harold's shadow loomed in the doorway of the house, glowering at me like a predator who had been denied his prize, I clung to that spark. Inside the ambulance, the EMT worked quickly, checking my vitals, pressing gently against my ribs, wincing when I cried out. "Possible fractures," he told his partner. "We need X-rays." My body shivered despite the warm blanket they draped over me. My mind was a storm of questions. How long could I keep pretending? How much longer before I broke completely? The sirens wailed as we sped through the streets, but underneath the fear and the pain, Evelyn's words echoed in my mind. I saw more than they think. That meant evidence. That meant the possibility that Harold's lies would not hold forever. I closed my eyes against the bright ambulance lights. My chest throbbed with every shallow breath. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, as the pain pulled me toward unconsciousness, I understood that something had shifted. The chain of silence had cracked just a little, and once a crack appears, it can grow. I drifted into darkness with one final thought. "Respect me," Harold had said, but maybe the time had finally come for me to respect myself, even if I had to crawl through fire to do it. I was not always this broken. There was a time when life seemed simple, though short-lived, before my father died. I was only 7 when the heart attack struck him down in the middle of a workday. One moment, he was a sturdy presence in my world, the next, he was gone, and all that was left were photographs and a silence at the dinner table that never healed. My mother, Donna, could not handle being alone, or maybe she could not handle the financial struggle that came with raising a child on her own. Within 2 years, she remarried Harold Carter, a man who looked strong, spoke with authority, and convinced everyone at church he was a gift from God. At first, I believed him too. He would pat me on the head, call me kiddo, and bring flowers for my mother, but the warmth was only for show. Once the doors closed and the curtains were drawn, his voice hardened, his temper flared, and slowly, the house that should have been a place of safety became a prison cell. Harold insisted on controlling every detail of our lives. He took over the finances, immediately setting up joint accounts that my mother no longer had access to. He locked important papers away in a metal cabinet. Even my birth certificate and school records disappeared into his drawer. I did not understand it at first, but I realized later that he was building a system where he owned every piece of me. My mother accepted it without complaint. She said it was easier to let a man lead, that Harold knew best. I watched her shrink into herself, becoming more obedient every day. When I was 10, she gave birth to Madison, my half-sister. From the moment Madison was born, Harold treated her like a princess. She got the best clothes, the newest toys, every ounce of attention he could spare. Meanwhile, I was told I was lucky to have a roof over my head. At family dinners, if Madison dropped her fork, Harold would rush to get her another. If I asked for seconds, he would sneer and tell me I was ungrateful. He started using the phrase extra mouth, spitting it at me like poison. I learned early on that in this house my worth was measured in silence and obedience. The abuse began quietly, with sharp words and cold shoulders, but by the time I turned 13, Harold was already shaping me into his target. He criticized my posture, my grades, the way I laughed. If I looked him in the eye too long, he called me disrespectful. If I looked away, he called me weak. My mother never stepped between us. Instead, she whispered that I should try harder not to provoke him. Harold's control extended to my education. When I was offered a scholarship to a summer art program, he said no. He told my mother it was a waste of money and told me to focus on chores at home. Later, when I earned a small academic award that came with a cash stipend, he took the check from me and deposited it into the family account. That money paid for Madison's dance lessons. My dreams shrank each year under his boot. Gaslighting became the soundtrack of my life. Every time I expressed hurt, my mother said I was too sensitive. Every time I pointed out something unfair, Harold told me life was unfair and I should toughen up. They built a reality around me where I was always at fault. If Harold yelled, it was because I provoked him. If Madison mocked me, it was because I was easy to mock. Over time, I stopped believing my own feelings. I convinced myself I was the problem, that if I just tried harder, they might love me. By the time I was 17, Harold's mask in public was flawless. At church, he donated money, shook hands with the pastor, and carried Madison on his shoulders like the world's proudest father. Neighbors thought we were a picture-perfect family. I could not tell them that at home he made me scrub floors until my knees bled, that he slapped me for leaving crumbs on the counter, that he called me worthless. So often, the words started to echo in my head at night. Even teachers began to look away. Once, a teacher noticed a bruise on my arm and asked quietly if everything was all right. I smiled and said I was clumsy, repeating the same excuse my mother had taught me. When I told her about the question, she panicked, hissing that if I breathed a word about Harold, the authorities would take me away and she would never forgive me. Fear stitched my mouth shut tighter than any threat Harold could make. I grew into adulthood under that shadow. At 18, I dreamed of college, but Harold insisted I stay home to save money. He promised I could take classes at community college, but every semester he found a reason to delay. The car needed repairs. Madison's school tuition was due. Bills piled up. The dream slipped further and further away until I barely mentioned it. By 20, I was working part-time at a diner just to have a little cash of my own, but Harold demanded most of my paycheck for the family. I started hiding small amounts, $10 here, $20 there, in a secret account under my mother's maiden name. I did not even know why I did it then, except that some instinct whispered I might need it one day to survive. Through it all, my mother remained silent. She never raised a hand against me, but her silence cut deeper than Harold's strikes. She chose him again and again over me. Sometimes I caught her eyes flickering with guilt, but the guilt never became action. She was too dependent on him, too afraid to be alone. So she left me to absorb his rage. Madison grew into a mirror image of her father. By her teens, she mocked me openly, repeating his insults, recording videos of my humiliation on her phone. When I begged her to stop, she laughed and told me no one would ever believe me over her. And I believed her. By 25, I was still trapped in that house, still bending under Harold's rules, still swallowing every insult. I told myself that leaving was impossible. He had the papers, the money, the authority. I told myself that one day things might change, that maybe if I stayed quiet enough, obedient enough, he would finally see me as family. It was a lie that kept me chained. Deep down, I knew the truth. I was not a daughter in that house. I was a punching bag dressed up as family. And every day that passed, I disappeared a little more into the role they carved for me. The bruises never lasted as long as the words, but they left a deeper scar. By the time I turned 21, Harold had perfected the rhythm of his violence. He rarely struck me in places that could be seen easily, but the pressure of his hand around my arm or the back of his palm across my ribs was a constant reminder that I lived under his rules. He made sure the curtains were drawn and the television loud when he lost his temper. To the outside world, he was a man of service, the church volunteer who handed out boxes of food, the smiling neighbor who waved when he mowed the lawn. People nodded to him in the grocery store with respect. Inside our house, he was a tyrant. Donna repeated the same phrases whenever I tried to resist. If you call the police, they will split this family apart. If you tell anyone, they will take me away and you will be responsible. Her voice shook as she said it, but she meant every word. The guilt dug into me like claws. I told myself if I kept silent, I was protecting my mother, that enduring Harold's rage was better than destroying what little family I had. Madison, meanwhile, learned to enjoy my pain. She was 2 years older by then, spoiled and confident, and she wielded her phone like a weapon. Once she filmed me scrubbing the bathroom floor after Harold forced me to redo it 3 times. My hands were raw and bleeding from the chemicals. She posted the video online with a mocking caption about lazy sisters and laughed when it got likes from her friends. Another time she tripped me intentionally while I was carrying plates. The crash drew Harold into the kitchen and he backhanded me without asking what happened. Madison caught my eye and smiled as I lay on the floor with blood on my lip. I realized then she did not just copy Harold. She enjoyed the power he gave her over me. I tried to carve out small spaces of my own. I bought a cheap notebook and filled it with scribbles, thoughts I dared not speak out loud. I kept it hidden under the loose floorboard in my room. Writing was the only way I could remind myself that I still existed beyond the role of servant. I saved coins and small bills from the diner, folding them into old envelopes and slipping them into a hollow I made inside an old teddy bear. It was pathetic in size, barely enough to buy a bus ticket, but it was something. It gave me a sense that maybe one day I could leave. Yet each time I imagined walking away, I thought of Harold's locked cabinet with my papers inside and the certainty that he would find me. He knew every corner of my life. My mother's voice echoed in my head, warning that no one would believe me. So I stayed. The tension escalated slowly. Harold began setting tests for me as if I were a soldier under his command. If I missed a spot cleaning, he would make me redo the entire room on my knees. If I spoke at the wrong time during dinner, he slammed his fist on the table and demanded silence. He told me I was nothing without his roof and his food. He said I owed him respect for keeping me alive. I learned to read the signals in his face, the twitch of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes. They meant danger was coming. I lived in constant anticipation of the storm. The worst part was the loneliness. I could not confide in friends. Harold controlled when I left the house and with whom. If I stayed late at work, he accused me of plotting against him. If a coworker spoke kindly to me, he sneered that no one would ever want a broken girl like me. Isolation was his weapon, and it worked. My world shrank to the walls of our house, the diner, and the shadows of fear. I remember one Sunday when Harold gave a speech at church about family values. People clapped, some even wiped tears from their eyes. I stood in the back with my mother and sister silent, while he praised respect and love. The hypocrisy made me sick, but I bit my tongue until it bled. Afterward, people congratulated him. "What a wonderful father you are," they said. He shook hands and smiled. That evening when we got home, he accused me of looking at him with disrespect during his speech. He shoved me against the wall and hissed that I had embarrassed him. My mother stood by the sink and whispered for me to apologize. I did, even though the words tasted like poison because I knew the alternative was worse. By then, I had stopped dreaming of escape. I only dreamed of survival. Every day felt like another test I might fail. I held on to the secret money, the journal under the floorboard, like fragile lifelines. But I doubted they would ever be enough. Each blow and each insult chipped away at my belief that I deserved more. Yet deep inside, a small ember remained. It whispered that this was not all there was, that maybe someday I could find a way out. But Harold's shadow was long and dark, and for the moment, it covered everything. It began with money, as it so often did in our house. Money that was supposed to be mine. A scholarship check with my name written across it, the one thing I had earned entirely on my own. I came home from the diner with the envelope tucked safely in my bag, my heart pounding with a fragile hope that maybe this time Harold would let me keep it. Maybe he would see that I deserved to invest in myself. But when he demanded to see it and I hesitated for half a second, the storm began. His face darkened. His voice dropped low like thunder rolling across a plain, and he said that Madison needed the funds more that a good sister would sacrifice without question. I told him no. The word left my lips before I could swallow it back, a single syllable that shattered the silence of my obedience. Madison gasped as if I had cursed. Donna pressed a hand to her chest and whispered my name like a warning. Harold's eyes went flat cold, then the explosion came. His fist struck the table, rattling the dishes, and he advanced on me with heavy steps. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. He shouted that I was ungrateful, that everything I had came from him, that without him I would be nothing. My chest tightened with fear, but for the first time I did not bow my head. I clutched the envelope to my chest and whispered again, "It is mine." That was all it took. His hand shot out and ripped the paper from me, tearing it in half as if my achievement meant nothing. He flung the pieces on the ground, and the rage in his eyes told me that destroying the check was not enough. He wanted to destroy me, too. The first blow knocked the breath out of me, his fist slamming against my shoulder. The second sent me sprawling across the floor. I tried to crawl, but he kicked me hard in the side, and a white flash of agony blinded me. I heard a sickening crack inside my chest, a sound that told me something had broken. My lungs seized, every breath shallow and desperate. "Respect me!" he roared as his boot connected again. "Respect me!" The words echoed louder than the blows. I tasted blood, metallic and bitter, running down my throat. My vision swam and darkened at the edges. Donna stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth, eyes wide with fear, but no movement. No shield. Madison watched with a smirk, phone clutched in her hand, though I could not tell if she was recording or just savoring the show. The world tilted and I collapsed on my side, clutching my ribs. The pain was unbearable sharp every time I tried to breathe, like knives sliding between my bones. I begged silently for it to stop, for him to walk away, but Harold crouched down beside me, his voice a growl in my ear. "You will learn. You will obey." Then he shoved me back to the ground. The last thing I remember before darkness pulled me under was the sound of Evelyn's dog barking outside and her voice faintly calling my name. I woke briefly to chaos. Flashlights, the hurried voices of paramedics, the cool air of the night as they lifted me onto a stretcher. Donna's voice floated near them saying, "Accident, accident." She fell while Harold loomed behind her, silent but menacing. I tried to speak, but the mask over my face muffled me and pain dragged me back into unconsciousness. What none of them knew, not even Harold, was that Evelyn's camera had caught everything. Her security light had been triggered by the shouting, and her system had recorded the scene through the open curtains. The lens had captured Harold's body, lunging his boot, rising and slamming down my body, curling in defense. The microphone had caught his roar, "Respect me," clear and undeniable. That video would become the piece of truth no one could erase, but in that moment, I was just a broken girl being wheeled into the night. The sirens wailed as the ambulance carried me away. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of conversation, possible fractures, internal bleeding. "Get her stable." Each word blurred into the next. I thought of the envelope torn in half, the dream shredded. But mostly, I thought of how easy it had been for them to stand and watch my own mother. Frozen, my sister entertained, and I wondered if survival even mattered when love had already been denied me. Darkness swallowed me again, heavy and merciful, but somewhere in the shadows I clung to the faint knowledge that Evelyn had seen more than they realized, and for the first time in years, there might be proof strong enough to tear through Harold's lies. When I opened my eyes again, the ceiling above me was bright white. The hum of machines surrounding me, and a dull ache pulsing through my chest with every breath. I tried to move, but a stabbing pain forced a groan from my lips. A nurse leaned over, quickly adjusting something at my side, her voice calm and firm, telling me not to move, telling me I was safe. Safe. The word felt foreign. My ribs were bound tightly, bandages wrapped around my torso, and an IV fed into my arm. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a nightmare, but then I caught sight of the bruises darkening my arms, and the memory came flooding back like a floodgate had been opened. Harold's boot, his voice, "Respect me." My eyes filled with tears. The nurse asked gently what had happened if someone had hurt me. I shook my head quickly, fear clamping down like a vice, and whispered that it was just an accident, just a fall. She did not look convinced. Later, a doctor came older and serious, explaining the damage in clinical terms. Several cracked ribs, internal bruising, and signs of previous injuries that had healed improperly. His eyes lingered on me with a mixture of pity and frustration. He told me he was obligated to file a report because the injuries did not match a simple fall. It was hospital policy in cases where domestic violence was suspected. My heart pounded. I nodded, but inside I felt the ground slipping away, knowing Harold would find a way to twist this. Soon, 2 officers arrived at my bedside, not the ones from the house, but detectives in plain clothes. They asked if I felt safe, if someone had attacked me, if my stepfather was responsible. I wanted to scream, yes! I wanted to point at Harold's face in my memory and tell them to lock him up forever, but the image of his glare froze me. I remembered Donna's whisper that the family would be destroyed if I spoke. I remembered Madison's laughter. I lowered my eyes and repeated the lie. I tripped. I fell. They exchanged looks writing in their notebooks, but they did not push. They said they would keep the file open, that if I changed my mind, I could call any time. Then they left me with my silence. Hours passed. Pain medication blurred the edges of reality. I drifted in and out until a familiar voice stirred me awake. Evelyn stood at the foot of my bed, her eyes full of worry. She looked at me like I was her own daughter. She said she knew it was not an accident, that she had seen more than I thought. My chest tightened. She leaned closer and whispered that her security camera had recorded part of it. She told me I was not crazy, not alone, and that there was proof. Tears slid down my cheeks. For the first time, I felt a sliver of hope, fragile but real. Soon after Evelyn left, another figure appeared in the doorway. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Ethan Ward, my old boyfriend from high school, the boy I once dreamed of running away with. We had not spoken in years. He looked older, steadier, his eyes wide with shock as he took in my battered body. Evelyn had called him, told him what happened. He sat down beside me, voice breaking, as he asked how I could have lived like this for so long. I turned my face away ashamed. He did not press. He just sat there, his hand resting gently over mine, and for a moment I let myself remember what it felt like to be cared for. The next morning, Evelyn returned with coffee and determination. She said she had already handed the video to the police. My stomach flipped with fear, but she reassured me. This time, Harold would not be able to hide behind lies. The system might move slowly, she said, but it had started moving. Still, I felt doubt coil inside me. Harold was clever. Donna loyal, Madison cruel. I could already imagine them twisting the story. But Evelyn's presence, Ethan's quiet support, and the firm gaze of the nurse who refused to treat me like just another broken girl all planted seeds inside me. Seeds of something I thought I had lost long ago. The possibility that I could fight back. As the days passed, I healed slowly, though every movement reminded me of what Harold had done. Nights were the hardest. I would close my eyes and hear his roar, feel the crack of his boot again. Panic jolted me awake, heart-racing, lungs tight. Nurses comforted me, one even telling me that trauma takes time, but it does not define who I am. I wanted to believe her. By the end of the week, the pain dulled slightly, and though fear lingered, I no longer felt completely alone. Evelyn promised she would testify. Ethan promised he would stand by me. The doctor promised he would not let the case be brushed aside. For the first time in years, I felt the faintest shift inside my chest. It was not victory yet. It was not freedom, but it was a step. And in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by strangers who seemed to care more than my own family ever had, I let myself breathe a little deeper, even though every breath still hurt. The hospital discharged me after nearly 2 weeks, though my ribs were still tender, and every step felt like fire spreading through my chest. They sent me home with medication instructions for rest and a mandatory referral to counseling. In cases flagged as possible domestic violence, the system in America requires victims to meet with a counselor, and though I wanted to refuse, I could not. A social worker met me on my second day back in Donna's house, sitting across from me with kind eyes and a clipboard. She asked questions in a gentle voice about my injuries, about Harold, about whether I felt safe. I shook my head at first, repeating the practiced lies, but her patience chipped away at my walls. Each week I met with her, and each week the truth crept closer to the surface. At night, memories surfaced in sharp flashes. I remembered winters when Harold locked me outside in the cold because I forgot to polish his shoes. I remembered sitting on the porch, shivering, my breath fogging in the air, my fingers numb, while Donna peeked through the curtains but never opened the door. I remembered the time I earned a small award at school and came home excited only for Harold to snatch the certificate from my hands and tear it in two, saying it was meaningless without his permission. I remembered the way Madison laughed when he humiliated me, capturing my tears on her phone. The counselor told me these patterns were abuse, that I was not imagining them, that my feelings were valid. It felt like sunlight cracking through a locked window. Still, I was afraid to step fully into the light. Evelyn was relentless. She brought food she called the police regularly to ask about progress. She kept telling me that her camera footage was safe and secure. She showed me a copy once and my stomach clenched as I watched Harold's boot connect with my ribs, my body folding, his voice thundering. Respect me. It was horrifying to see myself like that, but it was also undeniable proof. The detectives contacted me again, this time armed with Evelyn's video. They asked me to walk them through the night. My voice trembled as I admitted what happened. For the first time, I said the words aloud. He kicked me. He broke my ribs. He has done it before, their pens scratched across notepads, their eyes serious but steady. They promised me the case would not vanish. Still, I knew it would take time. Harold had a lawyer. Donna stood by his side. Madison filled social media with claims that I was unstable, dramatic, seeking attention. She posted old photos of me smiling at family gatherings, writing captions about how I was faking everything now. People in our small community whispered, some believing her, others unsure. The shame pressed heavy on my shoulders. Yet I kept going to counseling, I kept writing in my hidden journal, and I kept talking to Evelyn and Ethan. Ethan visited often, bringing groceries or just sitting quietly while I rested. He never asked for more than I could give. He told me stories of his own struggles, how he had left town for years to find work, how he had learned that silence only feeds cruelty. His words stirred something inside me. The investigation stretched over months. Detectives interviewed teachers who recalled my sudden drops in grades, neighbors who admitted hearing shouting, even co-workers at the diner who had noticed bruises. Slowly, a picture built itself piece by piece until it was no longer just my word against Harold's. It was a pattern of evidence. One night, I sat on Evelyn's porch sipping tea, and she looked at me with fierce determination. You have been fighting alone for too long. Now the fight is shared. Those words stayed with me. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was not doomed to be Harold's victim forever. The weight of years still clung to me. Sometimes I woke drenched in sweat, certain I heard his footsteps in the hall. Sometimes I almost convinced myself to retract my statement to make it easier to stop the pain of waiting. But each time those thoughts rose, I pictured Evelyn's video. I remembered the counselor's voice telling me my pain was real, and I saw Ethan's steady gaze promising that he would not let me fall alone. Bit by bit, I stopped doubting myself. I started to see Harold not as an all-powerful figure, but as a man whose mask was finally cracking. The counselor asked me once what I wanted if the case succeeded. I thought long and hard before answering. I want to breathe without fear, I said. I want to live without waiting for the next blow. She smiled softly and told me that was possible. For the first time, I let myself imagine a life beyond Harold's shadow. The investigation was still ongoing, hearings still ahead, but inside me something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing to reclaim my life. The day my mother and Madison came to the hospital unannounced was the day I realized blood ties meant nothing when loyalty had already been sold. I was sitting upright in the bed, still sore but stronger when the door opened, and there they were, carrying the same expressions I had memorized all my life, a mix of disapproval and entitlement. Donna walked in first, clutching her purse like a shield, her lips pressed tight. Madison followed, arms folded, eyes glittering with scorn. For a moment, none of us spoke. The tension pressed down heavier than the bandages around my ribs. Finally, Donna said I had to stop. Stop talking to the police. Stop listening to Evelyn. Stop letting strangers interfere with family matters. Her voice trembled, but her words were sharp. You will ruin everything, Clara. You will destroy this family. Madison smirked and added that no one believed me anyway, that everyone knew I was dramatic. She leaned against the wall like a judge passing sentence. You think anyone cares about your little story? You are nothing. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to lower my head, to nod and apologize, but something inside me shifted. The counseling sessions, the nights spent with Evelyn's encouragement, the steady presence of Ethan, they had built a small flame in me. I looked at them both, and for the first time I did not shrink. My voice came out steadier than I expected. He is not my father, and you, I turned to Donna, you never protected me. Her face paled. She whispered my name again as if saying it could erase the truth, but I pressed on. You stood by while he broke me. You let him strip away everything I had. Madison rolled her eyes and muttered that I was pathetic. I told her she had been his accomplice, enjoying my pain because it kept her safe from his wrath. The silence that followed was thick. Donna clutched her purse tighter, unable to meet my eyes. Madison shifted uncomfortably, though she tried to mask it with a sneer. For once, I did not feel small. For once, I was the one holding the mirror up to them. Donna tried again, softer this time, begging me to think of the family, to withdraw my statements, to tell the court it had all been a mistake. I shook my head slowly. Family is supposed to protect, not destroy. If protecting him means betraying myself, then I choose me. My ribs ached with each word, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Madison snapped that I would regret this, that Harold would crush me when the system failed me. But even her threats felt hollow. I had seen the video. I had spoken to the detectives. The tide had shifted. They left eventually. Donna's shoulders slumped, Madison's glare burning holes in me as she walked out. The door closed and the room was quiet again. I exhaled slowly, every breath still painful but filled with a strange new strength. Later, Evelyn visited and I told her what happened. She nodded with approval, her hand resting warmly on mine. About time you told them the truth, she said. That night, I lay awake replaying the confrontation. For years, I had feared them, their judgment, their silence, their cruelty. But now I saw them clearly. They were not gods. They were not even strong. They were weak people clinging to a broken system of control, and I was no longer willing to play my part. The confrontation marked a turning point. From that moment on, I stopped thinking of myself as their victim. I began to think of myself as a witness to their crimes, and I vowed silently that I would never again let their voices drown out my own. The months that followed felt like living in a strange limbo, caught between the old life I had endured and the new life that was struggling to form. The investigation moved slowly, as I had been warned it would, because in America, the legal system requires layer after layer of hearings paperwork and witness statements before anything makes it to trial. Detectives called me in repeatedly, asking me to recount the night of the attack, asking about past incidents, asking for details I had tried to bury. Each retelling tore open wounds I wished would heal, but I forced myself to speak because silence had already cost me too much. My counselor continued to meet with me, coaxing out more memories. Sometimes I hated her for pressing, but in those sessions I began to see the pattern clearly, the years of gaslighting, the financial control, the calculated isolation. She called it coercive control, a term I had never heard, but one that described my life perfectly. Meanwhile, Harold hired an attorney with a polished smile who began spinning a narrative in the community. He claimed I was unstable, that Evelyn's footage was misleading, that Madison and Donna could testify to my supposed clumsiness. Donna indeed agreed to testify for him, repeating the same story she had told for years. She insisted to the detectives that I had always been dramatic, prone to accidents. Madison used social media like a weapon, posting pictures of me from holidays, where I smiled stiffly, claiming they proved I was not abused. Comments rolled in, some people defending me, others siding with her. The whispers in town grew louder. At church, Harold returned with his chin high, shaking hands as if nothing had happened. People looked at me with suspicion when I passed them on the street. It stung, but Evelyn reminded me that truth takes time to carve through lies. The detectives encouraged me too, saying the video carried weight no denial could erase. Still, the weight was grueling. I attended preliminary hearings, sitting across the room from Harold, his stare heavy, his presence suffocating. He did not need to speak. His glare alone carried the same threat it always had. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself not to shrink. Ethan came with me every time, sitting close, his steady hand a lifeline. Each night after a hearing, I would collapse in exhaustion, but a strange new determination kept me moving. I began to imagine a future beyond this case. I thought of college courses, of working without fear of my paycheck being stolen, of breathing freely. That vision carried me through. In the background, Evelyn gave interviews to local journalists, careful but firm. She explained why she had given the video to police, how long she had suspected something was wrong. Soon the video itself leaked to the media, and though painful to watch, it shifted the tide. People who had doubted me began to see the truth with their own eyes. "Respect me!" Harold's voice bellowed from every screen, paired with the sight of my body folding under his boot. Outrage spread. What had once been whispers in town turned into condemnation. Madison tried to fight it online, but her words rang hollow. Donna retreated into silence, her credibility shredded. Harold's attorney tried to suppress the video in court, arguing privacy violations, but the judge allowed it, calling it essential evidence. Through it all, I felt the slow burn of vindication, the first real cracks forming in the fortress Harold had built around himself. The months dragged on, but each step forward felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. I was still afraid, still haunted at night, but I was no longer trapped in silence. The system was finally listening. And though justice had not yet been served, the path toward it was open, and I was walking it one painful, determined step at a time. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where truth and lies are forced to battle in the open. On the morning of the trial, I stood outside the heavy double doors, my chest tight, my ribs still aching faintly, though months had passed. Ethan stood beside me, his hand warm on my back, while Evelyn adjusted her glasses and nodded firmly as if to remind me I was not walking in alone. When the doors opened, we stepped into a room already buzzing with whispers. On one side sat Harold, dressed in a pressed suit that could not disguise the tension in his jaw. Donna was at his side, eyes hollow, her hands twisting in her lap. Madison sat a row behind them, her phone in hand, until the bailiff ordered it away. They looked smaller than I remembered, not because they had changed, but because I finally saw them stripped of the power I once gave them. The judge entered stern and unsmiling, and the trial began. The prosecutor laid out the case, clearly describing years of abuse, the financial control, the gaslighting, and finally the brutal night when Harold's rage broke my ribs. Evelyn's video was introduced. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered to life. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might drown out the audio. Then it came the grainy image of Harold looming his boot, rising the impact on my body. The courtroom went silent except for the awful sound of his voice, "Respect me," echoing through the speakers. I closed my eyes for a moment, ashamed to see myself collapse, but when I opened them, I saw the faces of the jury pale and horrified. No one could claim it was an accident now. The defense tried to twist the story. Harold's lawyer argued that the video was taken out of context, that my history of clumsiness explained the injuries, that Evelyn was biased, but each attempt rang false. The prosecutor brought forward medical records showing years of hidden injuries, the counselor who testified about the patterns of coercive control, the neighbors who admitted hearing, shouting the teachers who remembered bruises and sudden declines in my performance. Piece by piece, the picture built itself not of an accident, but of a deliberate pattern of cruelty. When my turn came to testify, I walked to the stand on trembling legs. I raised my hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. My voice shook at first, but then steadied as I recounted the night, the years leading up to it, the silence I had kept out of fear. I told them about being locked outside in the cold, about losing my scholarship money, about the humiliation that Madison filmed, about my mother's refusal to intervene. I told them how Harold's control had seeped into every corner of my life until I believed I was nothing. As I spoke, I felt the weight lifting, not completely, but enough that I could breathe. The judge watched intently, the jury leaned forward, the prosecutor guided me gently, and when I finished, the room was so quiet it felt like the air itself had stilled. The defense attempted to break me on cross-examination, asking why I had stayed, why I had not spoken up sooner. I answered with the truth. Because fear is stronger than logic. Because when the people who are supposed to love you tell you it is your fault, you believe them. Because silence becomes a prison that convinces you escape is impossible. My words wavered, but they were real, and I saw recognition flicker in the eyes of more than one juror. When I stepped down, Ethan squeezed my hand, pride shining in his eyes. The trial stretched for days, each side presenting witnesses, each moment heavy with tension, but the video hung over everything. No argument could erase it. When closing arguments ended, the jury left to deliberate. Hours passed like days. Finally, they returned. The verdict was read. Guilty on multiple counts of aggravated assault and domestic battery. The gavel struck. Harold's mask cracked at last. His shoulders slumped. His eyes darted to Donna, but she looked away. Madison shifted uncomfortably, her bravado gone. For the first time in my life, I saw Harold without power, just a man shackled by his own violence. The judge delivered the sentence years in prison, mandatory counseling, a record that would follow him forever. Donna was ordered into counseling for enabling. Madison faced the collapse of her reputation. As the bailiff led Harold away, I felt something I had never felt before. Relief. The weight of years pressed lighter on my chest. I had faced him in public, I had spoken the truth, and the world had finally listened. When the trial ended and Harold was led away in chains, I expected to feel triumph, but what I felt instead was a deep quiet, a silence inside me that I had not known since I was a child. The courthouse emptied slowly, reporters clustering near the steps outside, their voices calling my name, but I ignored them. I walked past the flashing cameras with Ethan at my side, and Evelyn close behind my feet, light in a way they had never been before. For once, I was not dragging chains of fear with every step. Harold was sentenced to years in prison, a place where his roar of respect would echo against walls that cared nothing for his demands. Donna tried to reach out weeks later, calling my phone late at night, begging for forgiveness, but I let the call go unanswered. She came once to the diner where I had returned to work part-time, her face drawn and older, her hands trembling as she tried to explain that she had been scared too, that she had believed she was protecting us by staying silent. I looked at her and saw not a mother but a woman who had chosen cowardice again and again until it became her only language. I told her softly but firmly that I could not forgive, not now, maybe not ever. She wept and left, and I felt no guilt, only a sense of finality. Madison disappeared from the community after her online tirades backfired. Employers refused to hire her friends, cut her off, and her once smug confidence shattered under the weight of isolation. I did not celebrate her downfall, but I also did not mourn it. She had played her part in my destruction, and the consequences were hers to bear. My focus turned inward. Healing was not sudden. It was slow, painful, and uneven. Some mornings I woke with panic squeezing my chest, certain I could still hear Harold's boots in the hallway. Some nights I dreamed of his voice booming "respect me" until I jolted awake in sweat. But each day I practiced choosing life over fear. I attended therapy not because the court required it, but because I wanted to rebuild myself. I began classes again using funds from a scholarship program for survivors of domestic violence. Sitting in classrooms filled with young voices made me feel both out of place and alive. I was reclaiming a future Harold had tried to steal. Ethan stayed near, never pushing, simply offering presence. We walked along the shore on evenings when my chest hurt from the weight of memories. He told me that healing was not about forgetting, but about refusing to let pain define the future. His words sank deep. Evelyn remained my guardian angel. She checked in, often dropping off meals, knitting scarves, reminding me that community could be family too. I began writing about my experiences, first in private journals, then in a blog. I did not expect anyone to read, but soon comments appeared, especially from women my mother's age and older. They wrote about their own hidden scars, about husbands who demanded silence, about families who turned away. They thanked me for putting into words what they had buried. I realized my story had become more than survival. It had become a light for others stumbling through the dark. Months later, I returned to the courthouse not as a victim, but as a speaker at a local awareness event. I stood in the same hallway where I once trembled, and this time I spoke with strength. I told the audience that healing is possible, that silence is not safety, that respect begins with ourselves. Reporters covered the event, and for once, my name was not tied to shame, but to resilience. On the anniversary of the night Harold broke my ribs, I went to the beach alone. The sun was setting, painting the water gold. I stood barefoot in the sand, breathing deeply, the ache in my chest, now only a reminder rather than a cage. I thought of the words he had shouted, "Respect me," and I whispered into the waves, "I respect myself now." The tide carried my words out to sea, and I felt free.